In our mission to get Black women's voices and interact with guests, we would be remiss if we didn't give our own selves space to digest issues and to talk amongst things. So we're excited to introduce this Bottomless Mimosas series, where it's just us three co-hosts chatting in this mini episode. And you already know what bottomless mimosa means when you hear it. It's about brunch. It's the fellowship, it's the food, it's the friendship, and it's also the storytelling, it's the venting, it's the camaraderie and sisterhood and all of those things. So that is what we're striving for in this conversation today. And as we think about the pillars of our podcast of culture and authenticity, as well as advocacy and community, we wanted to tackle the idea of authenticity at work. How do we show up at work? And we know that could mean hair, that could mean our voice, that could mean just not going to the happy hour after work. So how do we show up, and what types of things happen to us when we show up as our authentic selves? And then just a bit about whether or not we should even show up as our authentic selves. That's been recent research as well. Mm-hmm. So just relax with us with this, midweek conversation.
Imagine you have a drink, some kind of cocktail. I should have one right now, actually. I should have made one. I'm really good.
Next time we do a midweek, we'll do that.
We should have a mimosa.
Right, we should have mimosas while we're talking with different, juice blends or whatever. But I mean, for today, I know specifically we wanted to kind of touch on, appearance, especially for Black women in the workplace, or, even in education, right? It's wherever you go for your professional setting. And I think it's a perfect topic, being that the Crown Act recently passed, right? And I remember seeing the headlines, and the first thing I thought was, can you believe we need to get legislation to say you cannot discriminate on Black women for the way they wear their hair? Can you imagine? Like, that's what really came to my mind initially. And then, of course, by my own experiences, I previously did not really wear certain hairstyles to work. And now I kind of make it my point. Like, I'm like, listen, I'm going to wear these braids. I'm going to wear my locks, and they're going to be down to my butt. So what? That doesn't mean I'm not a professional. I still have my degrees behind my name. I still show up to this meeting. I'm still professional. So, I mean, before I start sharing stories, that's just the start of it all. I know you guys have your experience.
Go for it.
You want me to share? Okay, the one story I will say that sticks out in my mind the most.
Everybody has a one story, right?
I mean, it takes everything in you to maintain your professionalism in the moment. And for me, it was in the workplace about 4 years ago. And I had been working there for at least a year and a half at this point. And the dress code is pretty strict. Their dress code even talks about your hair, your nails, everything, like what that looks like for them, jewelry, whatever. And I remember this day specifically because I was wearing these cute gray ankle pants, they were fitting just right with my pumps. My jacket had my blazer on and my blouse. Like, I was just giving all professional. But over the weekend, I got my hair braided. And I was supposed to have a meeting with one of my CFOs, because my role, I talked to a lot of CFOs, VPs, et cetera, et cetera. It was a lot of cross collaboration. I kid you not, this man walked to my office, looked at me, looked back out, looked at me again, and looked at the name like, wait a minute, Kristen, is it, you just look so different. So who else would be sitting at my desk, sir?
With your name on the door.
You need to be so obvious with it, though.
So obvious. And to make things worse, the same day, and this is the first time I've ever put a natural protective style in my hair. Like, I was relaxed at the time, so my hair would just be, in a wrap, or I was doing micro links before micro links became the hot thing that it is now. I was doing sew-ins and micro links, or wearing my hair in a fresh perm and wrap. So this is like the first time I'm wearing braids. And one of my other coworkers comes to me and he's like, well, Kristen, today you just look so urban.
Right.
I'm
What does
sorry,
that even
what?
mean?
I stopped. I just stopped what I was working on, full spin around in my chair. And I'm just like, I don't understand. Explain. And he's a minority himself. He isn't Black, but he was a minority. And I was just shook. Like, wait a minute. I need you to explain. And the backpedaling. And I was like, but I dress like this all the time. I was always wearing my heels. Okay.
Yes, that was me.
It was okay. I was always wearing my heels. I always had on my, pencil skirt, slacks, whatever. Like I was coming professional.
So that was me.
Okay, this is the part before remote work. Now it's yoga pants and clothes on the bottom half. But in the office, I was making sure like I was coming dressed professionally. I had my bags right. I was there. And for you to sit here and tell me I was urban, and I was like, I dress the same every day. What are you talking about? I wanted him to say it. I could not say it because
that's so classic. I wish they would. I wish he would.
Because this conversation is gonna go left really quickly.
Yes.
You're gonna show yourself in this conversation. Right. It's what I be waiting on.
Yes.
No, seriously. I remember when I was in grad school, and that was, you let my mentee tell it, that was eons ago. So I was a grad student in 2008. And I had just started, I had gone natural maybe like in 2007. And so I was living in an area where you couldn't find a bunch of professionals to do Black hair. And I just was committed to just wearing my hair straight. And I had been wearing it straight, and I was in a class, and we might have been in class for about 2 or 3 weeks. I think probably 3 weeks. I missed a night because I was sick. This is a class that's once a week. So the next time was going to be an exam. The exam was being held in a lab. So I get to the lab and I knock on the door. The professor said, "Excuse me, this lab is closed. This is for a class only." And I go, "I'm in your class." And he goes, "Oh," now this was the first time he saw me with my hair curly out, not straight. So he all of a sudden didn't recognize me. And I'm like, "Sir, you have one Black student in your class. I am she." But in a way, it reinforced this feeling that I felt like I needed to wear my hair straight all the time. That I didn't want to go through these different experiences of like, who are you? You don't look the same because your hair is not the same. Yeah. And I'm like, I recognize you with or without a beard.
Right.
And this was, of course, pre-COVID. So no one was wearing that.
When Susie goes blonde, you still recognize her.
Oh yeah, they cut their hair and it's beautiful.
It's gorgeous. Oh, who did you go to? Where are you going? Like, so it, I was a 22, 23-year-old. And so it just, it didn't make me self-conscious, but it reinforced that feeling like showing up authentic. It's not acceptable everywhere. You have to manage your identity, meaning your physical identity in a way. Yeah. So yeah, that's when it sticks out to me.
Yes. So this is such an interesting conversation because I do think that we are sort of pressured into it by the societal norms and being in public administration, which are very sort of buttoned up, rigid, stale environments anyway. The pressure is still on. And while I do see hairstyles as a form of resistance, it's been that way since, afros and even before, but that is not necessarily my way of choice to show up as authentic. That's not my hallmark necessarily of showing up as authentic. Like, yes, I play with my hair, but I also like the barrier of not having them know me in my full authenticity. I don't want to show up at work like I show up on the weekend because we're not friends. And also, I don't necessarily want you to talk to me as it is. So by having a new hairstyle, that means you're going to talk to me. And I want to protect myself from that. So it's more calculated than it is like fear of showing up authentic, or like it is some sort of nervousness or discomfort. It's a choice. Like I want to protect that part of me, but the way that I choose to lead with my authenticity at work is through my voice. I will ask the questions. I'm not concerned about my DC accent. I know that I can still be articulate, or just making sure to stand up for the little guy, or taking those other types of risks. You know, they have all of these leadership assessments, and I think it was a disc where it analyzed your natural style and your adaptive style, and mine were identical. So I'm not code switching. You know, I'm not changing up how I am, because I do it through my core values and my voice, and that feels so much better to me than thinking about like what I'm wearing or what my hair is, because you know, sometimes it can be a distraction from the message that you're trying to send.
So it makes me wonder, like, well, I guess there's not necessarily a right or wrong, you know, way to show up at work. Then, yeah, I guess the right answer is how you feel comfortable. If it fits in their guidelines and how you feel comfortable, then do that. And I think sometimes you think about it, at least I know I do mull it over, or when I was working in a company, I don't currently now, but when I did, it felt like, is there any part of me that's showing up as a stereotype? Like, I don't want to be perpetuated, especially if I'm the only Black person. You know, is it okay? I think there's a constant conversation I would have with myself about, is this okay? Is this too Black? Is this, I don't know. Or if I get a sense of how people looked at other sort of expressions of Black identity, and it didn't seem positive, like, okay, then I need to keep this to myself, because this isn't a safe space, or this isn't a place where, not even that it's celebrated, but that it's just okay. There's no, to your point, Fatima, there's no conversation to be had about it, that I can show up this way and you're gonna talk to me about the same things you talked to me about yesterday, not that, you know, I have eyelashes, or my hair is longer, or my hair is shorter, or it's a different color. I had a coworker, we were working on marketing and branding, and there was another coworker that I knew, a great friend of mine, still to this day, one of my homies, and she said, and she was willing to stand in, as we were wanting to get patients, but she was like, I'll stand in as a patient. And I remember this guy saying to me, we were going to go take photos, and he said, oh, what's going on with her? Because I haven't seen her show up with a couple of different hair colors. Wow. I was like, her hair will be done. That really ought to be the only concern. Like, it'll be done, it'll be presentable, like that's enough. But to him, it was not okay to show up with purple hair or red hair, or a different hairstyle than you had yesterday, and it might be different tomorrow. But it to him didn't represent what he thought our organization should be representing on a billboard or in some marketing material. And so to me, it was, wow, if I showed up like that, is this a conversation you're having about me to someone else, questioning whether this is presentable, whether this is okay, whether this reflects the image of the organization? I'm not saying nothing about nobody's comb over.
The comb over, Sean.
They're bleached highlights.
Or frosted tips. I'm not saying nothing.
Them tape-ins started on, you know, the different, okay. They've been rocking the tape-ins, just putting that out.
I would say you just go bald, leave the comb over alone and go bald, but I'm minding my business. But it did put me in a place to say, like, wow, can I show up a certain way if this is how my friend is being perceived, if this is how she's being characterized, or her representation being minimized, right? So sometimes it feels like a constant debate about how you can show up. Yeah.
For me, I think I had a battle internally, and it would be the people closest to me that was just adding to my internal battle, because I was relaxed at 5 years old. Up under these braids, there's a lot going on. And my mom was like, I'm not dealing with you. Your sister's hair is thick. It's a lot going on. So I didn't know what my natural texture was like at all. I've just been relaxed for like almost 20 years of my life. I didn't even plan to go natural. It just sort of happened. And I was like, oh, let me see what this looks like. But I remember, like, think back growing up, every occasion, what'd your parents do? They got out. Well, my mom permed us, but I know a lot of people got the hot comb, and it was, you knew it was an occasion, right? It's Easter, it's Christmas, it's pictures, it's graduation. Like, I can get out of my mind that I could go to an event or a special occasion or a photo shoot with natural hair or braids or protective style, because my whole life, it's sort of like just not even accepted. And then I remember like when I got my first like real job working for the state, and I was like talking to my boyfriend at the time, and I was like, look, I'm thinking about getting braids, you know, I got a lot going on this week and this month. And he looked at me, and he just looked at me and looked at me, and I was like, what is happening? And he was like, well, how do you think they're going to look at you when you get to the office? And my feelings were hurt, but it was such a valid statement, not because he didn't want me to, but because he was just saying, like, you're the only Black woman in this office at the headquarters that's working on your team. You know that the perception is going to come with you, with whatever style you come in there with. And from then I was like, well, let me just book my sew-in because that's just what was easier. And for me, honestly, like, natural hair is more work. So I usually keep it covered, and I'm probably going to go back and get it permed again. But that's my preference, not because it's not acceptable in the workplace. And it wasn't until the job I have now, I remember like friends taking out their braids a week after getting them because they got an interview.
Yes.
And then not getting the position. And I would just cringe. I remember one girl in particular on my team in my department. She had to go, she went on vacation with her family. So you know what we do. We put the hair in the protective style. She came back.
For sure.
Right. And she had her monthly meeting with all like the C-suite people. Like, she had to go in and present with the top of the top. And she was like, yeah, I got to go take my braids out tonight because the meeting is in the morning. I said, that's a waste of money. They're just going to have to deal with it. She's like, no, we can't do that here. So it's even like I was dealing with it internally. I had people around me telling me just think about that perception. And then you get into an organization where it literally is like known that it's not even acceptable. Like, where do you go from here? Like, I just interviewed with locks in my hair, but I was not taking the bad boys out. I got the job. I mean, I just kind of like, you know, you just do a little twist or a little braid down to the side, put it back in a ponytail, a cute little professional, you know, style or whatever. But the fact that that's what we're up against internally and externally, and a lot of it is just overt and blatant, that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, Sean, when you were talking about the thought process, what to wear, how to show up, is that policing that we have to do of ourselves. And we, to an extent, we're all in the diversity, inclusion, and equity space. And one thing that we tend to miss as DEI practitioners, or even as these organizations are writing their statements, all DEI work is rooted in anti-Blackness. Racism is founded on anti-Black. And so it's not just BIPOC, you know, I'm coming to grips with that term, but most of the things that we're talking about stem specifically from anti-Black. And all of the efforts that we make to straighten our hair are to appear less Black, because we're like minimizing the effects of Blackness. If my hair is straight, maybe they'll listen to me more. Or if I wear new nail polish or short nails instead of, you know, tips or something, then I will be perceived as less threatening. Because, you know, if you look at research studies, the top two traits are angry and strong for Black women. So we're just working against those stereotypes. We're working against anti-Blackness, but it's really in an effort to save ourselves. It's like playing the game, because before now, when it became exciting to be on the right side of DEI, you had to navigate these systems, and you did have to play that game a little more. And it was about survival. It was about your career, and it was about moving up. And there were some trade-offs that we had to make. So I think too, we also want to give space to people who don't see themselves as having a choice, who feel like that is their only way to get ahead, because we do know that there are organizations and cities and whole states that are still like that, where we're in more liberal areas. It's just people who cannot make it out of that box without making these sacrifices, and that's unfortunate. But hopefully what they can do is still get to a place where they can contribute, where they can use their voice, where they can work on behalf, even if they have to sacrifice their appearance. So it's a lot to unpack with this.
Yeah, and I think, I'm sorry, I think being clear that it's not that you need to have this like rebellion. Like if you're fine with your nails being short is your preference, then that's your preference, right? That's fine. If you like your hair to be in a sew-in or weave, whatever, like that's your preference. It doesn't mean, oh no, I'm a Black woman and I need to show up in my authentic self. Your authentic self is whoever you feel comfortable being and what you feel is right for yourself. But just also, I think it's important to just be clear on reading the room and reading your organization, right? So I had an organization that was very strict about their dress code, like jewelry, nail color, hair color, tattoos, everything, but that was across the board. You know what I'm saying? So it's like when you're looking at an opportunity, yeah, you have to do what you have to do, because the ultimate goal is to build that career, add to the resume, provide food, and, you know, live essentially, but it's also a stepping stone. So it's like, don't feel like you need to insert yourself into a company and just shake things up, because you will get written up for not following their book. Like,
I've never seen that in a policy.
We'll talk about that offline. I remember reading it and I was just floored, because I was just like, I'm sorry, what? And then I realized, like, no, like people would have tattoos covered with Band-Aids, because you just can't do that. Like clinically, you know, there are a lot of my friends who are clinicians and stuff like that. They also have certain rules, right, about their nails and things like that, because you're working with patients and you're doing certain things, it gets in the way. And that's a part of why they have their rules. And then it just depends, private versus public company. Is it a startup? Is it a larger company? Like all of that comes into play. So don't come in here like, no, I come as one said, I need to be my authentic self. I dyed my hair purple and I came in here today, and forget you and your rule book. We are not saying that. Okay.
Right. Please don't.
Disclaimer. We are not saying that. Like if your company has these guidelines, whatever, it's either for you or it's not for you. And that's something when you're going through the process of interviewing, when you get to a certain point in your career, you learn a little bit more about actually interviewing them back and asking questions. What is your benefit package? How do you guys feel about this? Some places now are more relaxed because they're virtual. So I just wanted to put that out there before somebody comments and writes us about their inner rebellion and how it went.
Please leave a comment. We appreciate it. Yeah. But don't quote us as telling you to have done this. But I think that's a good idea to consider, you know, asking those questions, looking on their website, you know, seeing what they share, getting a good sense of what their culture feels like, and whether it might be inviting to you. If you feel like you like to express yourself and you don't want to have to separate that out from professional and personal, then get a good sense of what that organization's culture is and how open it may be, you know, and make some choices from there. I know at an organization I worked at where, you know, there some policies happen and then they sort of relax them later. And I can't think of a time where someone was scolded for like hair color or, wearing your hair a certain way. But I think it's just the discomfort of being questioned, right, by a coworker. And I think for companies, in as much as you make an effort to set these policies and guidelines about how employees should show up, you, I think, have to have policies and a culture that says if someone shows up within the guidelines of this policy, it's fine. It's not your job or someone else's job to question or to suggest you showing up urban, or why is your hair that color, or you change your hair all the time. I do think companies owe employees a working environment that says I can show up a certain way if it's within your guidelines, and shouldn't have to be harassed or taken aside or questioned by usually someone who's not your boss about how I'm showing up at work. I think, there has to be some a point where that's a culture. And when people feel like they can do that, that's because they get a sense that that's allowed. So while it's important for us to consider how we show up at work, it's also important for organizations to create a culture that tells people that who they are is welcomed in a space. And they don't have to be subject of conversation and scolding as if, their child. So that would be my recommendation.
Two things that come to mind when you're speaking, like I was doing my coaching certification and we talked about conflict in the workplace. And the instructor was saying how conflict arises typically when there's a misalignment of core values and how we are determining how people should show up as human. And most of the time, it's not a policy issue. It's not an actual something related to a work task. It is I or my boss or someone is not sitting well with how I choose to show up as human or how the other person chooses to show up as human. And that creates so much conflict. So when in other episodes, we've talked about the human aspect of the workplace and how the compassion needs to be there, the empathy, the understanding needs to be there. The second thing that it made me think of was also in a previous episode where we talked about entrepreneurship as liberation. We know the statistics that say Black women are, the fastest growing population of entrepreneurs, and some things like this could be why, because we're tired of the policing, we're tired of the playing the games. We don't want to navigate these systems any longer, and we want that freedom. Even if it means making other sacrifices about our careers or our lives or moving back home or whatever it is. Our freedom nowadays is of the utmost importance, freedom and liberation. So
you know what? When I thought about it, I said COVID was like a blessing and a curse, right? Because obviously the bad that happened in COVID. But when I took a step back and looked at what it did for me individually outside of the bad of being a pandemic, it made me focus and finish this dissertation so I could graduate. That was one. But
yes, doctor.
Right? I became a doctor during COVID, so, that was that. But I realized just the difference on how I could work without the microaggressions. Like I realized that a lot of my anxiety came from being in the workplace because of the way I was policed by these other coworkers. Not necessarily a manager, but I do remember one manager saying to me one day, like, "Oh, your nails are purple." And I looked at her like, they weren't even like a neon purple. Like, okay, they were kind of lavender. Like, excuse me, like what? And just being on edge about like something so small, or you hit traffic and you're 10 minutes late for work or something, and you feel as though like someone is just hanging over you regardless of the why. For me, I prefer to stay at home, and I'm an extrovert. So people imagine that I would be dying to get back into the office. And I was like, actually, I'm fine. But because I didn't have to have these interactions that were forced all the time, and these interactions that were borderline disrespectful, that they thought was just casual conversations in those hallway water cooler conversations. I just don't miss that part of being in the office. So there was the other thing for me. I'm like, I think I will always be remote if God is allowing me to do that.
I mean, studies have shown that people of color are not wanting to go back into the workplace. You know, that there's a separation there that has been enjoyable. They could focus on their work. They could spend time with families. I know initially when we did the presentation at COMPA the second time as the panel discussions, it was kind of mixed, where some folks felt with being on Zoom initially and doing these in-person meetings that it was a bit of an invitation for folks to come into their homes and their personal lives, but still policing. What's that in the background? Or, you know, what are your kids doing? You can hear your kids yelling and things like that.
What does your husband look like? They're like,
yeah, because everybody was at home. But once that initial transition there was a rhythm, and people could say, wait a minute, you're right. No, I'm not dealing with the microaggressions. When you talk to me now, it has to be deliberate. You can't catch me in the hallway anymore. You have to make an appointment to talk to me. So there's that protection there. And then there was always an audience because we're on a meeting. So they might be a little bit more skeptical about saying something ridiculous because they know, whether they feign ignorance or not, they know when they're saying something stupid that you could have the screen, you could turn your camera off, you can take a moment, you can take a breath, and that separation has been life-changing, and people are facing real anguish about the possibility of going back. But thankfully some companies got it, you know, and said, okay, you don't have to come back, or we're doing hybrid workplaces, and they may not be making that connection completely to their marginalized workforce, but at least that is helping some.
Yeah. And I think I'm curious, for one, if anyone is like actually honest on, like, you know, those engagement surveys and follow-up surveys that your company does like every year to see like, what can we do better, or how do you feel?
So.
Would you recommend? And that box comes up. Does anyone take the opportunity to really write in that box about these things around DEI and just being able to be comfortable in the company? And then on twofold, are companies reading this, taking it into account, and then actually applying something to make the workplace more comfortable and just being more inclusive in general? Like, I can say the company I'm at now, just because I can see it in the last position. Yeah, they would go through those survey responses. Obviously, it's not every response that comes to you, whatever, but we created a task force in my last position where the director would say, this is what most of the feedback was around this category. And then we would like brainstorm on how we could actually address it for our department. And that was new for me. And I was just like, this is exciting to know that I'm not just writing something and it disappears in the black abyss of the company and they just check a box and say, well, they asked how we were doing and that was it. But I would challenge more companies, I think, to do that, to make it more inclusive workplace. And I think that would help with retention in general. But I know we're almost at time.
I know, but I mean, what any other things we want to share on our wind down? This is a good brunch discussion.
No, I'll just say that, you know, since I still am a doctoral student, so my workspace is often a university setting, and I will say I've appreciated being able to have very frank conversations with individuals for my department, and just being able to talk about like, what does that look like? And three of my colleagues and I, we've been doing a presentation, and we're currently working on an article around recruitment and retention for Black students in higher ed, right? Because I think, you know, you have these conversations about race, right? And I think part of the reason, or part of the conversation about people feeling authentic is there a space, is there a culture, is there an environment that reflects to them that you can show up a certain way? And like I said, in my, in my master's days, this professor saying, well, who are you? And not just feeling literally recognized. It said to me, this isn't an environment where I can show up my authentic self. And so having conversations with professors about how, even in your syllabi, how in your class discussions, can you tell your students you can show up who you are? You can share as much of yourself as you want to share. And I think that part is important for breeding individuals who then go into workspaces that can be more accepting, more supportive of individuals showing up with as much of themselves as they feel comfortable being able to do so. And I think, so some of it I do think begins in an academic setting, right? Because they end up being your coworkers, they end up being your CEOs and your CFOs and your managers. And so I do think I can at least say that I appreciate some of those conversations bubbling up right now, at least in public administration, around equity in classes. And so,
having not only allowing people to show up how they feel comfortable, but not penalizing them for it when they do, I think is so important. And at my university, they have created an anti-racist curriculum that is mandatory for first year students with those two parts. And so when I taught part 2 this last semester, I had them create basically their anti-racist toolkit, because this is not just a class you want to pass. How are you taking it when you leave? We did the assessments. Where do you fall on the spectrum of how to be anti-racist, and how are you going to move from level 1 to level 3? When you're in workplaces, how are you going to use your voice? So that's such a great point about starting early, and granted that is a little bit late, they're already adults, but it's still earlier than trying to do it with a workforce of folks who've been working for 20 years. So I think, just to wrap it all up, authenticity is a spectrum. It encompasses so much, and we are constantly navigating the space from being closed off and hiding who we are to showing up in our full authentic selves. And all of it is okay, but we do need to make it more so of a choice in companies, and not by force that we have to hide who we are. And that for one thing, they secretly love us anyway.
Yes, they do.
So when we show up, because when we show up, what's the other part of that? We show out.
Yes.
It's like it creates something. Yeah, it creates something in them that they wish they could have. And that's a whole nother episode to talk about appropriation and all of those sorts of things. But when we do it, when we show up, when we are resilient, when we can face what we're facing and still be glorious and still show up and still run your companies in XYZ, they think it's a threat. They don't understand how we can do it. And I think that is part of the root of it, more than just that the hair is purple. It's like, how dare you show up in your full glory?
Yeah.
So we will continue conversations like these just amongst the three of us. And it's just like, whatever you want to talk about, please, please, please let us know, because we will tackle it.
Yes, we will.
Send us an email, answer those poll questions on Spotify. And of course, don't forget to join Facebook and our 10K community. So see you soon.
Bye, guys.